Well, welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce the 23rd Seminar Series on environmental change convened by the Pacific Salmon Commission. I'm Gary Morishima. I'm the U.S. Section Co-Chair of the Coho Technical Committee, and I'm going to be introducing the topic for today and our speakers. We're going to be speaking about the Columbia River Basin Salmon Restoration Initiatives, two exciting initiatives that are just sort of getting underway. The Columbia River Basin once produced between 10 and 18 million salmon, and amongst those salmon were the June hogs and all five species of salmon. The June hogs were Chinook salmon that originated in the upper Columbia River. Since the natural production has been substantially reduced and largely replaced by hatchery production. Uh, there have been initiatives that are just getting underway now to try to restore the salmon production in the upper Columbia River. So today we're going to talk about two of those initiatives. The first is by Chad Fuller, who will be talking about sockeye restoration in the upper Columbia River. Chad works for the Okanagan Nation Alliance, and I'll just leave it up to Chad to sort of introduce himself and get started here.
Good afternoon. So my name is Chad Fuller. I am the Fisheries Program Manager here with the Okanagan Nation Alliance. So we'd say "Way," which is hello. I'm going to talk about this ongoing sockeye salmon restoration that is being led by the Silks Okanagan Nation here in the Canadian portion, I guess, of the Okanagan Basin for a few years. So the first thing I want to do is make sure I ground you in the place, in the territory. So this is a map of the Silk territory. You can see we like to affectionately call it the swimming duck here. And the area that we'll be talking about today is the Okanagan River Basin joins the Columbia River just here at where Colville Confederate Tribes is in the U.S. Near Brewster, and the river then crosses enters Osoyoos Lake, which is a transboundary lake just across the international border, and then we have a series of rearing lakes and various tributaries off of that portion of the system. I should point out that this is a large and vast territory, and the nation has been taking their responsibility to manage the water and fish and the land and everything in this territory since time immemorial. This international boundary that sort of has come through a significant portion of the territory is one of the complicating factors to carrying out work in this part of the world. So first thing we have to talk about is where we're at and where we were at the start and the outset of this journey. So this valley had extensive impacts. We have numerous dams, channelization of the river. So we saw an image here in the top of the river, the channelization of that river, and I've sort of labeled a few of the dams that were barriers. So the lowest one you see here, we've sort of drawn a little black line. That when we started the program, that was the highest barrier to salmon, and so no fish were able to get beyond that dam. We also saw a massive loss in wetland area, the riparian area next to the river. The habitat was simplified, and we saw a massive reduction in indigenous fish species. This is a classic picture we like to show. The top image is the Okanagan River coming out of Osoyoos Lake. You see the vast complexity of the meander in that flooded area with all of the oxbows. And then the lower picture was when we began the program, the nature of the dike with vertical drop structures built into the river to slow that flow. Interesting enough, you still can see some of the historic river in this image. So the Okanagan sockeye, again, when this program began, there was only two populations of sockeye in the Columbia River, Okanagan and Wenatchee. And I know later we're going to talk. I know Yakima is coming to talk, I believe. So there's exciting work that they've been underway. But the Okanagan population sort of ranges around 3/4 of the total population. I think some years more. For example, this past year, we were about 80% of the total population. So those were what we call the present day when we began. And it's a 1,200-kilometer journey up the Columbia River. And they're actually the 9 major hydroelectric dams on the way before they get to the flood control dams here at the outlet of each of the lakes that we work in. And the drive for the recovery work that we're involved with is the nation, is the culture. So salmon are integral to the Okanagan culture. There's some great images here. I love this. This is in the top image is at Skaha Lake, where the town of Penticton is, where our hatchery is now located. And there's a large harvest going on through there. And it's really led through Sencleep. The story of Sencleep was Coyote, is how Sencleep brought the salmon to the people. This is Chaptique. These are the stories that are a record of the Okanagan history. And Coyote's travels are the recorded natural laws of how he brought the salmon up the Columbia and to all the tributaries. That is at the heart of the work we do. It's based upon Chaptique, the restoration work that we begin. And unfortunately, we had fish passage loss, and we had this extensive habitat loss. This little dotted picture is just showing the extent that the fish were able to migrate before they hit a barrier when we started the program. It was really founded in the vision of leadership back in the 90s when the population got very, very low and we almost lost it. And the leadership at the time came up with this vision for the nation, and it was put the river back, put the fish back, and then we'll put the people back. And that's the vision that's still driving the restoration program that we're involved in today. So putting the fish back, I'm going to talk about and mention some of these, but the sort of, it involved an extensive amount of passage work. So this is just highlighting all the passage efforts that have been underway to date. McIntyre Dam was the barrier that was a dam between Oliver and Vaso Lake. That dam was switched and opened in 2009, where the gates were switched from undershoot gates to overshoot gates, and a pool and riffle was added to allow sockeye to move freely up the dam. That was a very successful and added an extensive amount of kilometers of river. Then in 2014, we opened the ladder at Skaha Dam, which was critical because that opened up a new rearing lake, what we call Skaha Lake. So a small rearing lake. And then the tributaries were opened up with the removal of some weirs and dams on the tributaries that come off of the Okanagan River, where the fish are able to then rear in Skaha Lake. And then we've begun the Okanagan Passage work. As you can see, the work still continues. 2019 was the first time we were able to open up the old original fishway at Okanagan Dam. Unfortunately, that fishway does not function very well. And so the next step for us is to build a new fish passage at that facility to open up that massive rearing lake of Okanagan Lake and the spawning habitat that's associated with it. So putting the fish back, as we like to call it, was the reintroduction of sockeye to Okanagan Lake. So as we said, it was initiated in the 1990s. The Okanagan Nation Alliance managed to bring together the Canadian Okanagan Basin Technical Working Group, what we affectionately call COBTWIG. And this is a group that consists of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the province of British Columbia, where we could come together to discuss, share plans and programs of what we're involved in salmon restoration, and discuss how we could work together to try to bring the salmon back. The first work that came out of that was a risk assessment, and then that initiated the experimental reintroduction program. The first years of that program were 2004 to 2016, and now we continue with an adaptively managed approach to increase that restoration program. So I want to talk about that program a little bit. So as you can see, it's a collaboration transboundary. We have funding from Grant and Chelan counties, as well as Douglas County PUDs. We have Fisheries and Oceans Canada and the Ministry of Waterland and Resource Stewardship from the province that join us in COBTWIG. And all of these groups sit together in another shared technical working group, a transboundary technical working group that we share the work that we've been undergoing each year. Part of that program was our flagship construction of the Kelpic steam hatchery. Please, if you speak in Siltian, apologies for my pronunciation. I'm not an Siltian speaker, so I struggle with the pronunciation, but this is a great word. This is cause to come back. That's the name of this hatchery. And you can see various images of the staff and facilities there. And we also, associated with this facility, have our own laboratory facility where we provide diagnostic services and testing services to the program. So putting the fish back, we started with this 12-year Skaha Lake reintroduction experiment that involved the removal of the dams. We then progressed, because that program has been successful, I'm going to show you some numbers in a moment, to outplants into Okanagan Lake, and then the initiation of that fishway in Okanagan Lake. So this is the numbers from our hatchery outplant program. And you can see the first 12 years, I think, of the program, 10 years, I guess, of the program. We made use of a partnership with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and used one of their hatcheries where we rented space in their hatchery further north. That was where the source for all those outplants in early on in the program. In 2014, the Kelpelch steam hatchery came online, and we were able to start running that facility completely independently. And then, as you see, we started doing small outplants in Okanagan Lake, and now we're able to shift to larger and larger outplants into that facility as time's gone on. This work is not just hatchery work. We have an extensive monitoring and evaluation program. So especially during the experimental phase, we carried out this wide range of monitoring in each of the lakes with TempDO, phytoplankton, zooplankton, shrimp. We carried out acoustic trawl surveys. There was a huge effort to try to demonstrate the carrying capacity of the lake, that the hatchery was not, implants were successful, that they were, and that we were starting to see wild fish return and be able to become dominant in the population as we continue to expand the program. We have a large pit tagging program where we monitor travel time and smolt to adult ratios. You can see there's a little dead pitch picture of somebody here taking data off of our the dead pitch fish. So we do a lot of adult return data and genetics to monitor the impact on the resident kokanee population of the reintroduction of sockeye. So here's some of these examples of the work of that monitoring. So until 2017, we did a full workup of all these analytes, all these data points within Osoyoos Lake. And in recent years, we've started to reduce the amount of monitoring that we do in that lake. And some of the outcomes of that work really identify some of the big issues that we have when in some years and not other years. So we have this temperature squeeze in Okanagan Lake, this rearing lake, for when the adults return. So during the summer, the dissolved oxygen starts to reduce, and as the temperature starts to rise from the surface, and the dissolved oxygen gives this nice little squeeze. So we end up with only 12 to 16 meters of suitable habitat, which limits the fish. And some years, under some conditions, we do see mortalities associated with that. We also have had an extensive habitat program to put the river back. I'm going to show you the very first Okanagan River Restoration Initiative site. We call it ORI 1. So you can see the image on my left here has the diked channelized river, and we did a dike setback in this opportunity, which was a small opportunity to look at re-engaging some side channel. So we set the dike back, re-engaged the side channel, and established some riffles here at the outlet of these. And one thing that's exciting, the one on the right here is the original just post-construction. The one on the left is a much more recent picture. And what you can see is that flood plan is now completely, we even have trouble touring people in this area now because the riparian vegetation is fully reestablished. The floodplain area there is engaged. And you can see that the gravel is moving and being distributed by the river and creating these excellent riffles that the fish really love to utilize. And we have extensive habitat restoration program all up and down the river. So I'm just giving you a couple examples. This is another site where we established a little side channel floodplain for fish rearing, particularly for Chinook. So there was an opportunity here to lower the create this lowered area, add the complex wood structure that the habitat that the Chinook really like. And then we connected that to the channel through the dike with a box channel. You can see the picture in the bottom. This is that area creating a really nice little side pool that can be utilized by the fish for their rearing habitat. And one of the biggest impacts we've seen in the program is a fish water management tool. Prior to us beginning the work, the management of water within the Okanagan was really for flood control, drought, and for agricultural water use in the Okanagan. So the fish water management tool collects data, a range of data from the system, and can inform us how to best manage that water for the benefit of all fish. So in the case of kokanee, their shore spawners are affected by the lake level, where drawdown zones can create desiccation and really impact that spawning. And flows in the river, depending on the timing of those increased flows, can really cause impacts to scouring out those eggs prior to hatch. So this tool takes those into account as well as the flood control and drought, and creates this nice little visual for water managers to help feed in water management scenarios to inform potential impacts of those scenarios on various life stages of the fish and also their other components. This tool has been hugely beneficial in improving the outcome of the in-river spawning as well as the kokanee populations. We've seen a great benefit to the population with the application of this management tool. And so has it been working? This is a slide I've stolen from one of our PUD partners. And so you'll see that I just wanted to highlight the gray line and the red line here. You see that the average return of the population early in the 90s was very, very low. And you can see the key point there where the risk assessment began, where we started implementing the reintroduction program in 2003. And then we started seeing those benefits of returned salmon beginning really in 2008. And that average Okanagan count in the last few years has really been dramatically increased. Now this is a wells count data that we showed on this last slide, and I'm repeating it here in the blue. So we're seeing a much larger return of fish to wells, large enough that now we're seeing a large amount of harvest opportunity in the Columbia River. And this slide is just identifying sort of maybe the difference between the total run and what we actually get in spawning escapement. So you can see beginning in 2012, we did start to see a really drop in the proportion of spawners to escapement within the system. Particularly problematic are these odd years where we're getting a very low escapement, despite some variation and even some good return years in those years. We see low escapement. 2015 is, if anybody is from the Columbia system, you'll recall how devastating that year was weather-wise, where thermal barriers set up in the Okanagan River. The temperatures were very high and we had a long extended drought, and we lost the vast majority of that run that year, effects that we still continue to feel. But that discrepancy between the total wells count and the spawning escapement is really critical for us, and we need to really find ways that we can investigate how we can overcome that problem and how we can work together to try to solve that. I don't have the 2024 data on here, but I should point out that it is a huge year of return to the Okanagan, similar to even slightly larger than 2014, which was our largest year to date. So the total Okanagan sockeye population count over Wells Dam this year was over 490,000 fish. Yeah, and keeping in context that the entire Fraser sockeye return this year was only 456,000. So we're now seeing a return larger than we're getting in Fraser River, so identifying just how well this program has been doing. And the thing we really want to point out is that the vision of the nation is to put the river back and put the fish back and to put the people back. And it's really that the nation's leadership from our cultural leaders that is one of the differences that we feel makes this program successful. We have groups of people here carrying out salmon calling ceremonies where we call the fish back. We carry out fry release ceremonies every year where many of the children and youth get to come and join to release fish into the river and send them on their way. And we also are now able to have a salmon feast return here in the nation, and that's been an amazing experience to be able to observe and watch as these opportunities come back that we haven't been able to see before. So, Kalpelk this is what drives us. We're following in Coyote's direction. We're trying to make sure we bring the fish back. We're very happy that the fish are showing us the way, that if we put the fish out there, that if we improve the conditions for them, that they show us a tremendous resilience and success to return. And this is for the benefit of the people, but also the benefit of all things, of all living things. And so Limnip, thank you. I appreciate the time to be able to talk to you and share a little bit of the story of the success of the sockeye return to the Okanagan, and also to share how much more we have to go, how much more we want to see fish come back, and how we want to see those numbers of the 10 to 8 million sockeye returning to the Columbia River, and we want to be a part of that and look forward to being a part of that process. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chad. A very inspiring story. It gives us some hope that if we create the conditions and the habitat and work together, that we have a chance to bring some of these fish back home. Our next speaker is Tom Iverson. Tom is with the Yakama Nation Fisheries, and he's going to talk about the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative.
We have a panel presentation today. As you'll hear about today, the states of Washington, Oregon, and the 4 Columbia River Treaty tribes, the Nez Perce tribe, Umatilla Indian Reservation, Warm Springs tribe, and the Yakama Nation formed a group about a year and a half ago to address the perils in the Columbia River salmon. And that's what we're here to talk about today. I want to introduce my co-presenters, Michael Garrity from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Washington Governor's Office, and then Jim McKenna from the state of Oregon. And so I think Michael will start it off. I'll cover some of the middle. Jim will pick up some towards the end, and we'll be open for questions when we're done.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, again, my name is Michael Garrity. I'm a special assistant with WDFW and also represented the governor's office in negotiations with the federal government that led to what we call the Resilient Columbia Basin Agreement, which was responsive to the 6 sovereigns Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative. Go ahead and advance the slide maybe twice. this agreement, so we're going to talk about a couple of acronyms: the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative, which was the 6 sovereigns' vision and proposal to the federal government, and then the responsive agreement, or the commitments that were encapsulated in an agreement called the Resilient Columbia Basin Agreement. The way, I think we'll all talk about this a little bit, but I think the way this came about was there's been 25 years of litigation over the federal dams on the Columbia and Snake Rivers, and 5 or 6 times the court sent back the salmon plan or biological opinion to NOAA, saying they didn't get it right. They need to do more to mitigate for the impacts of the dams, and most of those remands were also accompanied by ever stronger injunctions from the court to provide more spill over the dams for the benefit of juvenile salmon. And when the Biden administration came in facing yet another round of litigation along similar lines, they sought to convene a mediation. They got a federal mediation service involved, and on the heels of some other discussion sort of over that, previous 25 years, especially around some interim operations that were set up in the late teens, the 2 states and 4 lower river treaty tribes were starting to think along the same lines when it came to what was needed, what a long-term path forward would look like. So by January of 2023, we convened our first meeting together as the 6 sovereigns, started submitting some joint white papers basically on different issues during the mediation, and we ended up knitting those together to become the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative, which was our comprehensive roadmap, both for ourselves as a sort of a coalition on these issues, and also as a negotiation proposal to the Biden administration during this mediation for them to respond to. And the CBRI it's an all H and associated issues like predation management document that's intended to get us to abundance goals that were set by the multi-stakeholder and multi-sovereign Columbia Basin Partnership, and do so in a way that acknowledges the need to maintain the services provided by the hydro system, even as the hydro system changes. So hopefully that's a good enough setup, and I think I'm passing it to Tom.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the purpose and objectives of the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative. Sorry, let me, yeah. The Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative was created at a moment in time when a lot of things were coming together. First off, salmon are reaching an all-time low. After 30 years of being listed as threatened and endangered in the Columbia River Basin, the abundance levels are about the same as where they were 30 years ago. And the natural populations are even declining. And it's really raised a red flag among the fish and wildlife co-managers in the basin. With climate change coming in, it's really concerning to salmon, but not only that, it's a large impact on the hydropower system and how it operates. The hydro system was originally built with large glacials and large snowpacks that really attenuated out the stream flows and really made the hydroelectric generation affordable, but also reliable throughout the year. And with climate change, we're seeing a very swift change in how the hydro system is being operated. Finally, we have the Biden administration come in, who is really putting a strong emphasis on treaty rights and tribal obligations, and acknowledging and recognizing the centuries of failed trust responsibilities to the tribes. And so it really created this moment in time where we need urgent action. The fishery crisis, the hydropower system, the number one impact on fish survival in the Columbia River Basin is changing. Energy development, we're going to double the amount of generation in the Columbia Basin in the next 20 years. And that's not going to be by building more hydro, right? So this is an opportunity where the role of hydro changes so we can look at different operations. A unified approach. We have an administration that wants to bring the whole of government to solving the salmon crisis in the Columbia River. We've really relied on Bonneville Power Administration and their mitigation funding as the primary driver for salmon restoration in the basin. And it's time that the U.S. taxpayers put in their fair share as well. The obligations to the tribes are finally being recognized. The U.S. government issued a report this summer acknowledging the failure to mitigate the tribes from the impacts of the hydropower system. And then finally, the future planning in the Columbia Basin really doesn't provide for salmon on the landscape. When you look at energy planning, it's actually increasing reliance on hydropower. When you look at water planning, we are going to see a much changed hydrograph and precipitation. And so we need agricultural communities to really start including salmon in their planning efforts, thinking about how water use is going to affect salmon. And so we have this moment in time to take advantage and do some planning for the entire basin, for all impacted areas in the basin. And we can do that planning with salmon included. The Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative really was built out of a fairly long-term effort. In 2010, I think the latest biological opinion from NOAA Fisheries on the hydropower system was again thrown out by the court. NOAA Fisheries hired some consultants to meet with all of the interested parties, agriculture, conservation groups, energy producers, to say why can't we find a common goal on salmon recovery? And what they heard back is we don't have a common set of goalposts. And so NOAA initiated an effort in 2016 to create an advisory committee to the Marine Fisheries Advisory Committee, so a subcommittee for the Columbia Basin Task Force. And the task force included all representatives of all stakeholders in the basin, from farmers, ranchers, transportation, irrigation, agriculture, conservation groups, the fishermen, the whole gamut. And they worked for 4 years and developed a set of goals, abundance goals for Columbia Basin salmon for 27 stocks. And so those goals, they developed a low, medium, and high range of goals. The low range of goals is at least delisting all of the threatened stocks in the basin. So even the low goal means increasing populations. And so at that same time, Representative Mike Simpson in Idaho spent 3 years putting together a comprehensive salmon initiative for the basin. And what he recognized, this is a Republican in central Idaho, that if we're going to increase the numbers of fish in the Columbia Basin, we have to look at dam removal. That was very controversial, but after all of his research, that was his conclusion. Following him, Senator Murray, Patty Murray, and Jay Inslee, governor of Washington, put a task force together to look at what would it take to recover salmon in the Columbia River. And their conclusion was, if we're going to achieve healthy and abundant populations, we have to look at dam removal. But before we talk about removing dams, we should replace the services those dams provide, because they are an economic driver in the basin. And so along came the Biden administration following all this work, talking about building a comprehensive salmon recovery strategy. And so it was clear that dam removal had to be in the conversation. Well, as they started their mediation process, everybody took to their corners, and we couldn't really talk about a comprehensive salmon recovery process. And that's when the 6 sovereigns got together to write the Columbia Basin Restoration. The objectives of the initiative, if we're, this is a large, complex problem, and if we are successful, what are the outcomes going to look like? So first off, we're going to restore salmon and steelhead to healthy and abundant levels. We will start to see increasing abundance levels across the basin, across the 27 stocks. Ecosystem health, we need a healthy ecosystem where we have cool, clear water flowing through the river to support other species beyond salmon and steelhead. Lamprey, bull trout, sturgeon, all of those stocks should benefit from a healthier ecosystem. We need hydrosystem operations that halt the decline of salmon. We need more out of the hydrosystem, more water dedicated to salmon and steelhead at a minimum, so that the natural populations stop declining and we can at least hold them level while all of this additional work is being implemented. We need a quick and just energy transition. Not only do we need to double the amount of generation in the basin, we need to do it in a socially responsible way. We need storage, we need programs. We can't rely, the more solar, wind, and intermittent generation that we develop just puts more stress on the hydropower system. We need to develop energy in a way that takes the stress off of the hydropower system, which frees up operations for fish. The original energy development in the basin, the development, all of these dams were done on the backs of salmon and the tribal nations in the basin. On this go around, when we build this amount of energy, we have to consider its impacts on the tribal nations as we do it. Quick and thorough implementation. We don't have time. We estimate that we've got 2, maybe 3 generations of fish before we start seeing populations blinking out, particularly in the Snake River. Over 40% of the populations are at a quasi-extinction threshold, which means those populations are at less than 50 fish within a tributary, which means we're getting very close on any of those. A single dramatic incident could wipe out a population. And finally, we need to honor the treaty and trust obligations that the federal government has made and failed to live up to for the past century. I'm going to pass this back over to Michael for the recommended approach in the CBRI.
All right, thanks, Tom. Recommended approach starts with empowering tribal and state fish co-managers to direct hydropower mitigation efforts in the basin. It's really directed from our perspective at the Bonneville Power Administration's Fish and Wildlife Program, where we help set things up through the Northwest Power and Conservation Council's Fish and Wildlife Program, and we do a lot of the implementation. But when it comes to some of the prioritization and getting the money off the ground, it's caught up in quite a bit of red tape, and we think there are reforms that could make it more efficient, and we think we could directly help with that. We need increased funding, both from Bonneville, but probably more importantly, in order to protect ratepayers and sort of respect some of the realities with Bonneville's budget in the near term. We want to go to Congress and get more federal appropriations for that. We need to catch up with an infrastructure maintenance backlog, both for hatcheries and for aging dams that aren't potentially slated for removal. We want to replace the benefits of the lower Snake River dams, as Tom explained, so to enable breaching to move forward under the principles embedded in the Murray-Inslee recommendations. We want to, where the 6 sovereigns, while not party to the phase 2 implementation plan agreement with the Upper Columbia tribes, are supportive of that agreement, and recognize that that's another centerpiece action to reach abundance in the basin, and then have sound monitoring and reporting to make sure that we're accountable and others are accountable toward the progress toward the goals identified in the Columbia Basin report, or the Columbia Basin Partnership report. Another goal is securing a transparent whole of government approach, and that really means, they're historically the management of the hydro system and associated mitigation and restoration programs is complicated enough on the federal level that it makes it pretty easy for federal agencies to point at other federal agencies and say, that was EPA's job, or that was Bonneville's job, or that was Reclamation's job. We've pushed for a way to make all those agencies more accountable to push in the same direction, and Bonneville's part of that. Yeah, go ahead. And then we need to advance what we can immediately, and concurrent with with implementing things like the interim dam operations plan and some near-term funding improvements. We need to move forward with going to Congress, asking for additional appropriations, working to reform the Bonneville Fish and Wildlife Program, proceeding with studies on replacing the benefits of the lower Snake River dams. And we have to do, basically all of this at the same time, because to avoid basically unacceptable extinction risk for some of the stocks, especially the spring Chinook and steelhead in the Snake River, and same in the Upper Columbia. We need to act now.
Thanks, Michael. I think we're going to ask Jim to step in and take implementation if he's available.
Yeah, I'm still here for a couple more minutes, Tom. So I appreciate it. I'll try to do my best. So why don't you go ahead and click to the next slide. I think what you've heard so far from Tom and Michael is a recurring theme. And that theme is that the 6 sovereigns developed a game plan, the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative, that is prudent and logical. And it really looks at a comprehensive fix. So we kind of took a statement from the U.S. government's agreement when they signed the agreement back in December 23 about developing a durable long-term strategy that restores salmon and other native fish populations to healthy and abundant levels, honors the federal commitments to the tribes, delivers affordable, reliable energy, and meets the many resilient needs of the stakeholders. It sounds like a big dream, but it is a comprehensive approach that is doable. And we do this all the time in terms of balancing things. When you look at, when Tom was talking earlier about the declining numbers of salmon and where we're seeking to hit healthy and abundant, the native runs originally were over 6 million. We're down with native runs at 1 million, maybe a little bit below 1 million for the native fish per year. We're looking at healthy and abundant that are 5 to 8 million, somewhere in that range, that were developed by the Columbia Basin Partnership. We're not saying forget about energy, forget about irrigation, forget about ag, do everything you can to get us back to 16 million. We're being very pragmatic, looking at the science, looking at the engineering, and saying, how can we balance all of these issues and have a win-win situation for all those sectors? So the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative was our vision for that, provided to the federal government. We sat down in negotiations to see if we could get a stay of litigation on the lawsuit that Michael referred to, and we were successful. The federal government signed in 2023, as did the 6 sovereigns and the NWF plaintiffs, an agreement, an MOU, to move this forward. So we stayed the litigation for upwards of 10 years. We've got a 10-year MOU that provides a package of initial federal actions to implement the CBRI, and I want to stress initial federal actions. As important and powerful as these actions are, they're literally just the start now, and we got to work through this for years to get to success. And then the parties agree not to sue each other over this time period. The key elements, and I'll talk fast here because I know we're short on time. Increased fish restoration funding. We need an enormous amount of money put on the table. There's been a backlog of work on many fronts for fish registration over the last couple decades. So we got the federal government to commit to $530 million in fiscal year 23 through 33. A commitment to maintain current levels of Bonneville's Fish and Wildlife Program and Fish Accord funding, and an agreement to seek additional money out of Congress. The tools for advancing that salmon recovery are a 10-year needs assessment or 10-year plan for the Mid-Columbia and the basin-wide area. In fact, we had a meeting this morning with U.S. Fish and Wildlife on how they're developing that plan, that 10-year plan. A lot of these commitments that the feds put on the table are moving forward as we speak. The Columbia Basin Salmon cross-cut budget that we've been working with the Office of Management and Budget to generate, so we can look at all of the federal government budgets that are currently out there that have opportunities to fund fish and wildlife efforts, but also where the gaps are and if there's a need to go back to Congress to fill some of those gaps, this cross-cut budget could help highlight that. And then recommendations for fish and wildlife mitigation management reforms. How can we look at the existing programs that are out there and find efficiencies in them, innovative ways to change the management of some of those programs so that the real focus is to leverage those monies to have the best benefit for the fish. Next slide. We need to do an evaluation of the replacement of services provided by those 4 Snake River dams. Again, I think Tom did a great job of walking through the daisy chain of studies that have come out over the last 5-6 years, starting with Congressman Simpson, with the Columbia Basin Partnership, with the Inslee-Murray reports, just one after another, all demonstrating that in order to hit these healthy and abundant numbers, especially for the Snake River stocks, the centerpiece action really is breaching those dams. Can we actually do that? Can we replace the services of those dams in a cost-efficient manner that provides clean, reliable, and cost-effective energy for the region and save those salmon runs? And do that in a timely manner. Again, it was touched on earlier that we've got a climate challenge in front of us, actually a climate crisis. So not only have we had the declining salmon runs for the last 100 years that continue to decline, and we got that crisis facing us, and we've been trying to deal with that for decades, some ways through lawsuits, other ways through just negotiation. But now we got this climate change crisis that's really driving the timeline where we need to act now. Time is of the essence. And then support the tribal clean energy projects and regional energy needs. A huge component of this agreement with the federal government, where they're looking at providing upwards of 1,000 to 3,000 megawatts of new tribal energy. DOE and the 6 sovereigns are co-convening an energy needs assessment for the region that will look at increased demands that are expected over the next couple decades, but then also how we're going to meet those demands with new clean energy sources. And I think it's important to note here that when we look at the graphic of the existing amount of energy generated in the Columbia Basin, how much more needs to be created, new energy sources to meet just the demand expectations. Those Snake River dams are a fraction. They're literally a blip on the screen for that total energy demand. Next slide.
Well, I think that's it for us. My
Excellent.
understanding is we'll take a break and then come back for questions, but I'll turn it back over to our facilitators.
Well, thank you very much. It's very exciting to hear all the progress that's been made and the commitments. We're going to take a very short break right now and ask. That'll be followed by a facilitated Q&A session. So please put your questions in the chat box, and we'll get started again in about 5 minutes or so.
Why don't we go ahead and get started with the Q&A. I think most of us are back. My name is Lori Whitecamp. I'm on Coho Technical Committee. We also have Sarah Martin, who's two of us will be facilitating today. And if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box. We also have a chat, but the Q&A is where the question should go. So start off for Chad. There's a question from Gary Morishima. The question was, what are the timeframes, goals, and sources of funding to support the restoration of priority species in the upper Columbia?
Fine. Let me find it to make sure I heard that correctly. Whether what were the three
Timeframes,
things?
goals, and sources of funding
Right.
for priority species.
Yeah, so a little bit of that's about capacity, but we have the direction we get from the nation is very broad and very large. So we are making good headway on sockeye, but we are way behind on Chinook recovery. Chinook recovery is of high importance for the nation, and we are really not making good progress. We started our recovery plan for Chinook in 2016, and we still really do struggle to make progress on that. We have initiated a number of different activities, including some of the habitat work that you've seen, but the Chinook in the Canadian portion of the Okanagan is listed. We have less than 100 pretty well every year, and some years less than 20 adults returning. So we really are at a critical stage where we struggle to even get access to brood here in Canada, and so that's something that's a priority for us going forward. We really need to see how we can overcome that. The rate that we're working on the Chinook, our recent analysis tells us that we're not going to see an increase in the population. We won't see any improvement or benefit, and so that's a critical problem for us, and we need to come up with some solutions for how to overcome that. And we are not even at a point where we can consider other species, but we are very interested in a broader range of species as well. So is the funding adequate? Never. I think we really strive to really get a huge bang for the buck of the money that we do get, and we try to ensure that we maximize return for that money. And I think we've really demonstrated that over the past few years. And so we're really proud of that component, but it really is a restricting aspect for sure. We're completely project driven up here. Our entire program is project driven. So every piece of dollar that we get, we've had to beg, borrow, and steal for. And it's all tied to deliverables, right? Every single cent that we spend is tied to a deliverable linked to that funding. So these are limiting factors that we really need to address. In terms of the rate and the pace that it's happening, I think we've all been surprised at how quickly the sockeye populations have been recovering. I don't think anybody expected that. You know, even up here, we didn't quite expect it to do so well. Like, and we always say, you know, the fish are going to teach us. Like, they're showing us that how desperate they are to come home, how desperate they are to maximize the space and the available habitat availability that we make for them. So if we make the space and get them there, they're going to do everything they can to return. And that's sort of a lesson I think we've all learned. You know, we anticipated it was going to take 30 years to get a population back into SCAHA that would be of any reasonable level. Where this year, I should say, we're in the middle of our escapement, so I can't, but it does look like we're going to have a really good return, and to the point where we could even look at just putting all of the stocking from the hatchery into Okanagan Lake, higher up the system. We never thought we'd be at that stage here, right? That wasn't part of the plan. That wasn't part of what we were told. It was going to be 30 years before you could even talk about Okanagan Lake. So we're really excited about the opportunity there. And that lake is large, has a lot of rearing capacity. And so we really look forward to seeing how the fish are going to make use of that, the sockeye particularly. But yeah, so that's the lesson for us. The pace, the funding, never enough. The pace, we think the fish are teaching us that they're ready to go at a faster pace than we are. I think that's the lesson that I think we should all take from the Okanagan program.
Great, thank you, Chad. We'll move on to the next question. It is for the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative panel. What do the 6 sovereigns see as the highest priority for the initiative?
Well, I'll start and Michael can jump in. First off, I think it's really important to know that because of the Resilient Columbia Basin Agreement, we now have a person sitting in the White House responsible for overseeing restoration of salmon in the Columbia River Basin. There's a Columbia Basin Task Force that are the sub-secretaries of all of the agencies, the federal agencies that spend money on salmon recovery in one way or the other. And his job is to oversee those subsecretaries and work with them to implement the commitments from the Resilient Columbia Basin Agreement. I would say as the highest priority though, when we signed on to this agreement, it's a far-ranging agreement of over 65 commitments. But what really triggered it was in 2020, the federal government did an environmental impact statement on hydrosystem operations in the Columbia River. And a judge that directed that environmental impact, redoing that EIS, asked for an assessment of a dam breaching alternative. And the federal government really failed to do an honest, transparent evaluation of dam breaching as a viable alternative in their EIS. As part of this agreement, as we showed you, the US government has agreed to reopen that EIS and actually do an honest evaluation of what it would take to replace the services provided by those 4 dams. And I think the highest priority for the 6 sovereigns is to get those studies completed. I would not say all 6 sovereigns are lobbying and pushing for dam removal. What they're lobbying for and pushing for is an honest conversation about dam removal that is supported by current science and information about replacing the services that those dams provide. So I would say that's the highest priority, is getting all of those studies completed so we can have that conversation in Congress.
Yeah, I'll jump in with it. To quote something Kate Markworth, an attorney for the Yakama Nation, often says is that this agreement is a buffet, not a menu. So we really need all the pieces of it, and I think that was reflected in the presentation. But yeah, I think you know, to get to restore abundance throughout the basin, we point to and we're really happy that the agreement reflects NOAA's Interior Columbia River Rebuilding Report that identified 3 centerpiece actions as urgent. And one of those was breaching that Tom was just talking about. The other one, or the other 2, are Upper Columbia reintroduction and significant habitat restoration in the Mid Columbia. So I'd say those are, you know, I don't I don't want to choose.
Great, thank you for those. Chad, we have another question for you. You had mentioned that you're looking at the genetics of the reintroduced sockeye, and the question from Marisa is, what are you learning from that?
Yeah, so there's a few things there. So there's a few different ways where we look at the genetics. So one of those is part of the genetic management plan that we have within the hatchery. So it's ensuring that we have a strategy. So the overall driving strategy behind our hatchery mitigation is to ensure that we produce a wild, sustainable population. That's our driving goal. And so that really informs the decisions we make about at every stage of how we implement that hatchery. So that includes a genetic management plan that ensures that we minimize hatchery effects and hatchery impacts onto the population. So that's part of it. So that's that monitoring component. The other component we're looking at is ensuring that we protect the kokanee populations, the resident kokanee populations in the freshwater that are resident here in the lakes that we have, because these are an important fishery for local communities and for the province of British Columbia. I guess the lesson we learned from the Skaha restoration so far is that well, the kokanee population is doing better in Skaha Lake than we've ever seen before. That was one big concern, and that was what drove that requirement for genetic monitoring of hybridization. And yes, early on in the program, as we started seeing sockeye come back, and there were larger numbers of kokanee and lower numbers of sockeye, we did see a higher rate of hybridization in the population. And then as we carried out the habitat work, which provided specific spawning gravel for kokanee, well, I should describe that. So we did a habitat spawning gravel project in over 4 phases in the main stem of the Okanagan River here in Penticton. And although we couldn't establish the amount of spawning habitat that there was originally because of the channelization and loss of meander, we established the ratios. So that ensured that we had spawning habitat for kokanee, for rainbow trout, for sockeye, and chinook at the ratios that would have been in that portion of the river originally. And that really helps with that segregation of the population as well. So as we've seen those the sockeye population increase, we've seen a stabilization of that hybridization rate to a sort of fixed level, which we would consider to be natural and part of the maintenance of the genetic variation of these 2 populations, where they can contribute to each other, right? To ensure that there's actually a stronger genetic viability of those populations. So that's the sort of outcome so far of the Skaha component of the recovery. And then we still will continue to look at those impacts when we expand to this much bigger Okanagan Lake system, which presents its own unique challenges for sure.
Just as a follow-up to that, do you have any evidence that the different lakes originally had genetically distinct sockeye in them, or were they? Do you think that was just one big population?
Yeah.
Given that sockeye in each lake, generally isolated lakes, tend to be very unique.
Yeah, I think there's that's a great question. The true answer is we don't know for certain. However, we do know some information. So we have some silts ecological knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, that says that there were different populations of those within those systems. And that's one thing we aim to look at is when are we going to start to see those populations become more discrete is maybe the way I would say. We talk about providing that selection space, getting the fish there, and then allowing that to emerge out of the population. You have to remember that there are certain long-term historical impacts which do impact that. So there's been a extensive kokanee stocking program brought kokanee from, I think, 7 different systems into this region over the years since the 1950s when that program began. So there is these long-standing impacts that we really don't know what is going to come out of it. Yeah, so that's how I would say that at this stage. We're not seeing one other point. So our hatchery program we use a thermal marking to discriminate our population, and we have the ability to do 4 different thermal marks within our hatchery. So we made use of that tool to do experiments in the system. So we released in 3 different tributaries in Okanagan Lake in the past with 3 different thermal marks. So in 2022, part of our dead pitch recovery, we did take a look at those fish and saw that 90% of them were returning to the exact tributary that we released them to. So that really tells us that, where you put the sockeye have this amazing, as we all know, this amazing homing ability. And I think that does indicate that possibly in the future, we will start to see that emerge.
Great, thanks, Chad. Question for Tom and Michael. Gary has noted that the challenges associated with rapid climate change present a compelling need for urgency and is wondering how the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative interfaces with global actions needed to address climate change.
You want to go first this time, Mike?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. I think, well, on the global emissions side of it, the initiative seeks to really embed the flexibility that's needed in the hydro system into a long-term regional decarbonization and electrification plan. And I think we mentioned the study that the U.S. Department of Energy and PNNL are working on with input from the 6 sovereigns and other stakeholders that will look at what it would take to put lower Snake River dam breaching into that picture in a way that still allows clean energy investments to move forward. And there's also there'll also be a sort of a backup plan that looks at like a high spill scenario if dam breaching if we can't get authorization from Congress for that, for instance. And then there's also significant investment for tribal clean energy development so that the tribes can really be part of that solution in a way that's cited equitably as well. So it's going to help solve sort of both add urgency and so kind of draft off of some other big efforts that would be happening anyways on that, but getting salmon and the flexibility salmon need from the hydro system into that picture. I think the other on more sort of the restoration side, we're trying to add some urgency to the to responding to the needs of really all the listed stocks, but probably especially the Snake River stocks when it comes to taking the actions like dam breaching that it'll take to get adequate numbers up into the high elevation climate resilient habitat that is in the Salmon River Basin and the Grand Ronde Basin. But sort of acknowledging that with the dams in place, you have thermal blocks and high temperature related mortality that is being exacerbated both by the dams and by climate change. And then some of the other restoration around the basin is also designed to increase resiliency. So I don't know if Tom has anything to add to that.
No, I thought that was excellent, Michael. At the heart of our entire negotiation and planning and development of the restoration initiative and the agreement was climate change. The lead negotiator for the federal government was John Podesta, his entire job is to set up the United States for an energy transition into sustainable energy that reduces impacts on climate change and figures out how we survive in that. So no, I thought Michael answered the question well.
Great. One more question for Chad. This is from Joe Taddy, and he's asking on your figure of the wells count versus spawning escapement versus spawners as a proportion. The two-part question. One is there harvest upstream of wells in the US and or Canada? Does that change the picture? And then also, is the spawning escapement enumeration part of the monitoring you do on the spawning grounds?
Yeah, we do enumeration of spawning escapement. Actually, we use a few different methods and a few different approaches. So that's a huge component of the work that we do to lay that one out. And yeah, so sort of what I kind of I should maybe highlight in that slide. 2012, when we started to see that escapement, a trend in the reduction of the ratio between wells, migration, and escapement, we saw that trend start to decrease in 2012. That's when harvest began on the river. So there is harvest on the river now. It's not that harvest is the sole driver of what's happening, but it certainly is a contributing factor in some of the low return years. So last year is a classic case in point. We were expecting a lower return. The return of the Okanagan fish was slightly higher than we thought, which triggered a harvest. And it's important, like we want to see everybody have access to harvest fish. That's one of the big drivers of the work that we do. But I think the harvest above wells was around 60,000. The total escapement was only 19,000 last year. So it certainly has impacts, and it's one of the things we look at is that right now we need to think as we go forward. And sorry, for the nation here in Canada, we didn't do any commercial harvest last year. The number was too low. The escapement number was too low. We did have individuals out fishing for a small number of fish, less than 400. So the nation up here in Canada was able to only have access to, around 400, estimated 400 sockeye. So not significant at all. But that was, so that we would protect the small numbers that we did get returned. Critically, these low odd years, we know that there are many factors contributing to this, and our lesson from salmon restoration is that you need to just deal with every one of the factors. You can't just try to pick your, what you think is the biggest, highest priority. You have to focus on everything, because any progress you make will accumulate and give you another benefit. I should say, was it Tom or Michael who was mentioning that the Upper Columbia was one of your recovery goals, right, is the highest priorities. Well, that's another initiative that the ONA is involved in. We have a partnership up here in Canada with two other nations, where the First Nations are really taking the lead on our Upper Columbia salmon recovery here in Canada. So this is sometimes called the Cursory Initiative, Columbia River Salmon Restoration Initiative, or it's been branded as the Bringing the Salmon Home Initiative. So we have a number of activities that are involved in that, and that is the next big priority for us. Secondary to the Okanagan, we have to make sure we hit our first priorities before we move to our second. But we are very active on that front as well right now. So I agree with them that is a big priority for all of us to try to work together to make use of those hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of river. Sorry to go outside the question and sort of talk about other issues, but
I was going to say, it sounds like maybe it's becoming a PST species as well. So yes.
Yes, yeah, right. The Pacific, the Okanagan sockeye is not in the PST. There is a placeholder in the treaty for when we get the population large enough to have harvest, to have those conversations. And that is certainly something we are looking at, and we would like to try to think about how we can all discuss that and decide how we make decisions. We know that access to fish, to harvest, is a huge priority for all people up and down the river. And our one river approach that we take to this is that we need to ensure that we prioritize the recovery in all years, not just in the large years. And yeah, so that's something we really look for in the future, for partnership, and how we're gonna do this. How are we gonna engage in this addition to the treaty, and what would it look like? I know
Well, I
that's a
think
big
we could,
challenge.
yeah, I was going to say, I think we can talk about this for another, easily half an hour, an hour. Unfortunately, our series ends at 3:30, and we respect people's times. I'd like to thank all of you again for really fascinating talks and definitely a lot of food for thought on what we can do to bring salmon back. I just want to remind everybody that on November 12th, there's a CSC workshop on climate resilient fisheries management and the PSC. And I'm assuming a more notice of that will be going out shortly for people who are interested in attending it. And otherwise, thank you so much again. It was a fantastic seminar. It will show up on YouTube, the Pacific Salmon Commission's YouTube website, usually within a day or two. And so then it's open for others to view as well. They get a lot of hits. So I'm sure this will be much appreciated. Thank you.
Limna.
Thanks.